I'm talking to you though. You're the stats guy.
Yeah, we're responding to
You're the stats guy, and we're the homies.
Welcome back. Last week we talked about the miscalculation of home field advantage, and this week we're talking about an entirely different dichotomy, which is offense and defense. Let's get into it. General question for the homies. By the way, we have everyone's favorite Bears fan filling in for Nikki. General question: which is worth more on the football field, offense or defense?
Offense. That's where your points are scored.
Beautiful. Defense.
Oh.
Do you think defense is going to be worth more?
Defense wins championships.
Love it.
Mine was just practicality. The points are scored when you're on offense.
It's a good point. My understanding of it is typically it's a race to 20 points, and if you can keep a team under 19, you're more likely to win. You don't do that on offense, you do that on defense.
All right, so to answer this question, I fit 3 models, all with winning percentage as the outcome. One using offensive yards to predict winning percentage. One using defensive yards to predict winning percentage. And one with yards differential, which is offensive minus defensive yards. So the results say that when you use defensive yards to predict win percentage, it's not significant. It doesn't reliably predict winning. Yard differential does reliably predict winning, but not as good as offensive yards alone, as the only predictor, is the best predictor of all 3. So when you take this model, so the 0.33 is 0.33% for every offensive yard. So when you multiply that by 100 and divide by 2 to get this plus 50 yards, you get about, and then you have to divide that number by 17 because that's the number of games. Yeah, you get about 3 wins a year if you just have 50 more yards of offense. How many wins do you think the yard differential? Which means you score 50 more yards on average than your opponent every week. How many wins do you think that's worth?
2.
1.
Wow. Dan is right. It's 2. All right. So there you have it. Offensive yards, much more predictive of winning and worth more wins when you do the math. Yard differential, surprisingly, not as important. Final thoughts?
Well, I mean, offensive yards are just offensive yards, where this has other variables, so therefore it would be less.
I mean, for the 2 different models, this is the R squared value, so 57% and 50%. Basically, it means that offensive yards by themselves were able to capture 57% of the story of wins. And yard differential was only able to capture 50%. For reference, defensive yards, the R squared was 7%. So very little bearing on wins, whereas these have a lot more. Obviously not perfect, but a lot more.
Yeah, I think there's still just like a net yardage because I feel like punting would be really important, and then just your return yards. But I'm curious. I would bet you it doesn't change your result that much, but I'm curious. So is the conclusion you would take from this that offensive yards are more important?
I would say that they are more important because they better predict winning, right? So I wouldn't say that like having 400 yards of offense is more important than only having 200 yards of defense. Obviously, if you have a great defense, it's going to help you. But I would say that if you're going to pay $50 million for a quarterback, or you're going to pay the same amount for a couple of defensive players, you might lean one way or the other, knowing that it's just much better at predicting winning going one way. If that makes sense.